Joining us now is Laura Tyson, the former head of the Council on Economic Advisors under President Clinton and now a professor of business and economics out at the University of California Berkeley. Professor Tyson, good to have you with us. Donald Trump delivered his tax speech today. Just give me your sense, just give me your big overview at this point. What do you make of it?
Well, it was a speech that started with taxes and focused very much on taxes. It made an argument which we have heard many times before that really is not supported by data and it's not supported by analysis, and that is if you have very large tax cuts that disproportionately favor the top, through a trickle-down supply-side effect, you will gain so much economic growth that there will be no increase in the deficit, no increase in the debt. He actually put together some remarkable numbers. He started out with the size of his tax cut. He then took away half of the effect on the deficit by saying, well, that would just be growth. He then said his regulatory reforms, that would be another dose of growth. And at the end of the day, well, if we had any deficit reduction left over, it would just be waste, fraud, and abuse. That was the plan. Was not a plan. It was not a plan, and it does not have evidence behind it.
So, Laura, I believe what you're saying is that you consider this voodoo economics. Would that be a fair description of what you're saying?
I didn't use that term. It has been used before to characterize a very similar approach. So we can call it voodoo economics, trickle-down economics, supply-side economics that is not verified in, as I said, in data or in analysis.
So, Laura, one of the things that Trump does here is he takes the tax code and says, let's go for something that a lot of conservatives have wanted and some non-conservatives, which is to have a simpler code, right? He's talking about basically 3 tax brackets. In principle, and is that a good idea? And then in practice, given where he's set those 3 tax rates in those 3 brackets, does it make any sense to you whatsoever?
Well, so I don't think that the issue of simplification is really an issue around tax brackets. After all, 3 brackets, you just go and you figure out what bracket you're in. This is actually about the way that our deductions and credit systems work. And so if the issue is simplicity, I would say this is not an issue of the brackets. This is an issue of how our credits and deductions work. And I think that actually the issue of the brackets is really an issue of the rates. It really is an issue, for example, of what the top rate should pay. And one of the things that he didn't mention this morning, but it's very, very important, is that in his corporate tax policy, where he's saying 15%, a lot of the income that is partnership income and high income individuals' income would actually fall to the 15% rate. It actually would not be at his top rate anymore. So there's other things going on there. So it is important to look at the fine print. I don't think 3 brackets is the issue of simplicity. It's certainly the real issue here is what's the amount of tax revenue lost, who is paying the taxes, what happens to the deficits, what do you have to cut in order to have a sustainable debt going forward if you use this kind of massive tax cut disproportionately biased to the wealthy.
Laura, it's Donnie, and the answer to that question, it's $3 trillion, but we could spend the next hour talking about trickle-down economics and all the points of his plan.
Right, we could.
I want you to take off your economics hat for a second and just put on your mom hat, your working hat, your out to dinner hat, and John, same thing, take off your journalist hat. And we both travel in very smart intellectual circles. I have not had one discussion with anybody about either candidate about their tax plans. This election, I've never seen an election that is less dependent on issues and is pure guttural. I can't stand this one. I can't stand that one. Does it even matter what Trump is coming out as far as his tax plan? Forget that we could dump all over it as you have, and I could spend the next half hour. It's almost irrelevant at this point.
Is that addressed to me? So I'm an economist, and I tend to want to, if I go into those kinds of conversations, I tend to want to get people to talk about the economic issues. Maybe it's true that in the initial conversation people are talking about something else, but I am an economic advisor and I tend to look at the 2 candidates in terms of what they are proposing economically. I think she has a very sound, very sensible plan that actually includes some tax cuts. For example, there's some simplification and tax cuts for small businesses, very important. She has some very important pro-growth investments, infrastructure and education. I'll just take as example. He says nothing about education. I would say on the stuff we've heard about this week, the child care and paid leave, if you look at this, I can change the conversation at a dinner party by basically saying, you know, we are the only country of the developed countries without paid leave. And what she has offered is a plan that is sensible in terms of the extent of time, in terms of the fact that it would cover mothers and fathers, in terms of the replacement value of the wages. Those are things which all the other advanced industrial countries are already doing.
Absolutely.
And they're doing fine. They're doing fine. So I tend to want to turn it back to the issues
I know you do, because you are an economist. Let me turn it to the dumber guy, John. John, and you this is what you do for a living. Do you even talk about taxes with people? Do you see any voter bringing? I've never seen anything like this. Whereas even to the point, as Laura says, where you can debunk everything Trump said, I'm going to go back to Teflon Don, it doesn't matter. The issues don't seem to matter, or at least the substantives of the issues don't seem to matter.
Well, I think, Donnie, I think it's important, I'm with Laura Tyson on this in the sense that if we have a dead heat race right now, one of the things that we have to try to do over the course of the next 2 months is try to talk about what it would mean if Donald Trump became president of the United States. And these are the policies he's saying he's going to pursue. So it may not matter to a lot of people at this moment, but one of the jobs that we have, and one of the jobs certainly the Clinton campaign has, is to try to elucidate what the impact would be if Donald Trump's policies were implemented. So Laura, let me turn the question back to you on this front. What is it how do you explain the appeal that Donald Trump seems to have to working class voters across the country when the policies that he's putting forward are, in your judgment, obviously bad for most working Americans, especially when it comes to this tax plan?
Well, you're the political pundit, not I. What I can say I understand makes some sense is that there is a fraction of the Trump voters who indeed have had a difficult time. If you look at that census report that just came out this week. There was a lot of great news in that for the median family. There was a lot of great news in that for lower and middle income families. But on the other hand, if you go back to where they were in 2000, or you go back to where they were in earlier, some of these numbers, 1993, 2000, what you see is that the median household income has actually not recovered to its previous peak. So, therefore, there are a lot of people who are, they don't think the economy is working for them. They're looking for an alternative.